Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be looking at this beautiful Art Deco piece that I got off of Facebook Marketplace for $275. And this piece was definitely worth it. This is really a beautiful piece. Especially down here, you can see that there is a beautiful inlay. And I'm not exactly quite sure what types of wood are used in this inlay, but it really gives a nice touch to this piece. And as I pan up here, you could see that we have some book-matched veneers, as well as some bakelite and metal poles, which are very common in this type of furniture. Taking a look behind this door, and we have some cedar veneer, which was used a lot in chests and wardrobes and things like that because cedar actually has a natural oil in it that repels moths and certain insects that could damage your clothes. And here we have some signs of a previous refinishing, which is the main reason why I kind of wanted to refinish this piece. But I'll get more into that in a second. Now just taking a look inside of these drawers, and these drawers are actually in very good condition. I'm still going to give them a really good sanding and a refresh, but they are in very good shape. So now getting into the reason why I really wanted to refinish this piece, you could see here there are very deep scratches, almost as if somebody just took a wire brush and just went at this drawer. And it's not just on this drawer, it's actually on the entire piece. And over here you could actually see that we have a bunch of pigtail marks, pigtail swirls. And this would have been caused by using a very low grit with an orbital sander, and I'm guessing that the person who had finished this last popped on maybe like an 80 grit and just went at this very kind of violently. But I think with a little bit of hard work, I should be able to fix this damage. So taking that into account, as well as the fact that this finish isn't really that great, is really the main reason why I wanted to refinish this piece. But other than that, the piece is actually in extremely good condition. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. So to begin here, I'm going to be cleaning this piece top to bottom. And I'm using MCS Cleaner and Degreaser, which is a very strong degreaser. And that's going to help me get rid of all of this caked up dirt that's on this piece. And you can see just how dirty, just with a couple wipes, how dirty this piece was. And this is why it's really important to clean your furniture before you do anything else. And that's because if there are any oils or waxes left on the piece, it's going to gum up my sandpaper very fast. And also, I'm going to be grinding all of that dirt down into the wood grain when I sand. And you really don't want that to happen. It can affect the adhesion of your finish, which can potentially be a very bad thing. So just something to keep in mind. And I cleaned basically every square inch of this piece. I cleaned outside, obviously. I cleaned the inside. I cleaned underneath. And I also cleaned inside the drawer boxes. So basically any spot that I planned on refinishing, I cleaned. And I actually had to get up on a ladder to clean the top because this piece was about as tall as I was. Alright, so the piece is nice and clean, so I'm now going to begin removing all the hardware. And this hardware is actually very beautiful. It's bakelite and some sort of metal. I believe it is bakelite at least. I'm not 100% sure. It may be some other type of plastic, but it looks like bakelite to me. And unfortunately, the metal part is not brass. It is magnetic, so it's definitely not brass. I'm guessing the previous refinisher spray painted the hardware because there is some spray paint on it. But when I get to the hardware a little bit later on, I'll find out some more. So I'm just going to take my carbide scraper and I'm just going to do a little test scrape just to see how intact this finish is. Because ideally I would like to scrape this finish off, but worst comes to worst, I could just use a chemical stripper, which is actually what I end up doing because this finish was actually pretty intact. And I am using Clean Strip Premium Stripper, which is the best stripper that I've ever used. It really cuts through those layers of finish very, very well. It is extremely toxic though, so you definitely want to make sure you're protecting yourself. I often see people who are using stripper not wearing a mask or not wearing any gloves or both, And you really don't want to do that. You really want to protect yourself against this stuff because if it gets on your skin, it will burn pretty bad. And the fumes are extremely harsh. So you really want to protect your lungs too. I made the mistake of using a couple pairs of nitrile gloves on top of each other when I was using stripper in the past. And nitrile gloves aren't exactly made for stripper or acetone. They kind of dissolve and disintegrate. So you really want to use butyl gloves, which are made specifically for chemicals like this. And on top of wearing butyl gloves, you really want to wear a respirator, obviously, which is going to protect your lungs. And you want to make sure that you change those cartridges out often. I really even should be wearing safety glasses, which I do usually use, but for some reason I'm not using them in this shot. Because I've gotten stripper in my eye before, and that stuff burns so bad. It's really not a good time. I'm really trying to take safety a little bit more seriously, especially now that I'm on YouTube and I have a bunch of people watching me. I really want to set a good example. Now, a question that I've gotten every now and then is, do you have to follow the grain when you're using a putty knife to remove stripper? And you don't necessarily have to go with the grain, but if you have to go against the grain for whatever reason, just be careful because you can scratch the wood with a putty knife. Now, when it comes to scrubbing off the finish on the waterfall edge, I'm just using a 3M stripping pad, which is an abrasive pad that's made specifically for scrubbing off stripper. And this just makes it extremely easy to scrub off that finish. And I'm also doing the same thing for the trim work on the side right here, making sure that I get down in between all those routed sections and making sure I get all that finish off. And I'm just using some acetone to scrub off all the residue from the stripper. And it's the same thing for the side. I'm just using that same acetone to get rid of whatever finish remains. Now I'm just going to remove this big, beautiful door so I can strip it as well. And I think I'm going to be adding new hinges to this door because the hinges weren't in great shape. They were actually bent a little bit. So I'm definitely going to be replacing those. I'm just going to remove all the drawers and I'm going to continue stripping. And while I'm stripping this bottom section right here, I'm thinking to myself what I would like to do to this piece. Do I want to keep it original like it was? Do I want to do something a little bit different? And I think I'm going to be keeping this original. I'm going to be using a little bit of a warmer stain for it, but I actually like what the previous refinisher did, in terms of color at least, not his actual refinishing job. And I'm just using that same 3M stripping pad to remove all the finish from the bottom trim and the feet over here. I usually use a nylon bristled brush to get rid of all the finish on trim work like this, but it all depends on my mood, I guess. There are always different ways to get finish off. You can use different tools, you can use different methods, and they're all effective, but it all depends on your taste, what you like to use. There's always more than one way of doing something, and just because I do something one way doesn't mean I don't know how to do it in a different way. And I don't know what it is about stripping off old finishes that makes it feel so therapeutic for me. I guess it's kind of like a out with the old, in with the new kind of a thing. And I just get such a feeling of satisfaction when I do it. And I know that a lot of people are probably like, what is he talking about? But I don't know. I just get such a feeling of like therapy when I do this. And in this shot right here, it almost looks like there's ghosting from the hardware, but that's not actually what's happening here. What's happening is where the hardware sat, there was no finish underneath it. I guess the previous refinisher just sprayed over the hardware when he refinished this piece last, and there's nothing but bare wood where the hardware would sit. So you'll see when I sand that it'll all pretty much disappear. And last but not least, I'm just going to strip this big, beautiful door. And I know this is a lot of stripping, but I got so much good footage of me stripping this piece that I just wanted to share it with you guys. And there is one thing I noticed about this finish. It's extremely thin. I'm guessing the previous refinisher only put maybe 1 or 2 coats of some maybe lacquer or shellac or something. There's really not much finish on this piece at all. Now, normally I would start with a 180 grit after I stripped off all the finish, but since there were so many scratches and pigtail marks that I had to get out from the previous refinisher, I decided to go with a 150 grit instead. But I do have to be extremely careful when sanding this veneer because the veneer that is already very thin is now even thinner because it's been refinished once before. So I really have to tread carefully here because I really don't want to go through this veneer. And you may notice that as I'm sanding this off, the bare wood underneath looks a little bit uneven. And that's just because there's so much damage underneath this that I have to get through that it looks like there's almost like shadowing on the wood. But as I continue to sand, it's going to all come out. One important thing to note here is that I'm not getting all the scratches out with my first grit. I'm getting a decent amount of them out, but I don't want to dig too deep with this 150 grit. I'll do the bare minimum with the 150, and then I'll climb up and get more of the scratches out with my 180 and 220. And a really good tip is to continue to change your sandpaper. There's actually a really funny quote that I've heard before, and it's go through sandpaper like you're not the one paying for it. And it's so true. A lot of the time people will use the sandpaper all the way down to the paper, and you really don't want to do that. It's not a good idea to do that. You really want to change your sandpaper out often. Now here on this waterfall edge, I'm using a foam pad, and I'm doing this because it's a lot more gentle on the curves. If I just went at this with the regular surf prep, I'd probably go right through. And I did go through in a couple small spots, which was unfortunate, but I knew it was going to happen eventually because this veneer is just so super thin. And this right here is the part that takes the longest for me, at least personally, and that is sanding all of this trim work, and especially on the base over here. It took a while to get all this sanded down because you got to get in between all those cracks and routed sections. It's very tedious, but we're getting it done. So I hand sanded all the trim work, and I'm just using my surf prep sander just to sand all the flat areas. And again, being very careful not to go through the veneer because the damage was literally all over this piece. It was on every square inch. And I really did my best to try and fix it, but it was a little nerve-wracking going that far down into the veneer that was already very thin. And I'm just hand sanding these two areas because my surf prep was just too big to fit into there. And I'm also sanding the internal parts of the carcass, and I'm also sanding the drawer guides so they're nice and smooth. And I'm just giving this really nice cedar veneer a really good refresh with a 180 grit. And this is going to reopen those fibers and get that really nice cedar smell going. And this is a really good shot coming up right here because in a second, I'm going to show you on this drawer just how much damage was actually on this piece. Yeah, so there's a lot of damage. It seems like from what I could tell, it seems like he popped on an 80 grit and just sanded the crap out of this piece. And there are even some scratches and marks from what seems like a wire brush. And I don't know why exactly that would have been there. I don't know what the purpose was, but it's all over the place. And now you can see after my treatment, it looks a lot better. And even so, there are still some marks that I cannot get out, and I'm not going to push it even further into the veneer to try to get them out. It is what it is at this point. And to me, being a perfectionist, it is a little bit frustrating to not be able to get them all out, but it's not worth going through the veneer. So I'm just going to do my best and get as much out as I can. And you could see on this shot right here how blotchy the stain was. And the way that this was refinished the first time, it really doesn't surprise me too much, but you could really see it in this shot. Now, there are ways to prevent getting those pigtail marks. For one, you don't want to be pushing down too hard on the sander. You want to let the sander kind of do all the work for you. You don't want to move too fast for the sander. You want to move relatively slowly, but at a consistent pace. And you also want to change your sandpaper very often, like I mentioned before. And doing those three things will definitely improve the quality of your sanding and will help prevent you from getting those marks. And finally, it's time to stain. I'm using a water-based stain by Saman, and the color is dark walnut. I kind of wanted to make the trim stand out just a little bit, not too much contrast, but just enough. And I think that this color is really going to give me the kind of contrast I'm looking for. Now, this is my first time actually using this stain, and I've seen some other people who I kind of look up to using this, so I wanted to give it a shot. Now, this stain tends to be pretty opaque, which is not a bad thing. It's actually kind of what I'm looking for the trim work, at least. Now, the veneer on this piece, when a finish is applied, the natural color of it is actually very light, and that's not really what I'm looking for. So I'm going to be staining this entire piece, basically is what I'm saying. But since this stain is so opaque, I'm not really sure how that's going to work out with the veneer. Because I don't want the veneer to be very opaque. I want it to be a nice kind of medium brown walnut color. And I definitely want the grain to show through a lot. So we'll see what happens. I'll do a little test area just to see how the veneer takes the stain and go from there. Now you can see here, I'm not using tape to tape off the certain sections of veneer. I'm just going straight in with a paintbrush and I'm just brushing on the stain. And that's just because whatever stain I do end up getting on the veneer that I don't want stain on, I could just do a very light sanding and remove it. Alright, so now that I got all of the trim stained up, I'm going to do my last sanding of 220 grit. And you can see I'm doing the pencil trick right here, which is something I really like to do, especially when I'm working with veneer. And the pencil trick, for anybody who doesn't know, is just making light marks on the wood just so you know where you haven't sanded, and it can help prevent you from sanding through the veneer. And also gives you a very even sanding. And like I said before, I got a little bit of stain on the veneer sections, but that's really no problem. I'm just going to come in with my sander and I'm going to sand all the excess stain away. There's also another way to remove stain, depending on which stain you use, oil-based or water-based. If you're using an oil-based stain and you want to remove some of the stain, just use a shop towel with some mineral spirits and you should be able to remove a decent amount of the stain. And it's the same thing with water-based stain. Just use some water and a shop towel and just a light sanding and you should be good to go. And most of the time, I'll usually hand sand the waterfall section of a piece, just because the veneer is usually extremely thin and that waterfall edge is very easy spot to go through the veneer. So if you're working on a waterfall piece for the first time, I would recommend hand sanding that waterfall edge, and with a high grit also, not a low grit. I would say probably 150 would probably be the lowest grit you should be using. So that will definitely minimize the risk of going through the veneer on a waterfall piece. And right before we get to staining the rest of the piece, I'm just going to clean up these drawer boxes a little bit. Now here, I didn't necessarily have to sand down the drawer boxes because they were actually in pretty good shape. But it's just something I like to do. I like to make sure that I really refresh every aspect of the piece, and it really makes it stand out in the end. I'm also just giving the underside of the drawer boxes a light sanding. There were a couple splinters here and there and a couple pieces of rough wood, so I just want to make sure that all of that is nice and smooth. Now, these drawer boxes are constructed of oak, and oak was used a lot in the construction of drawer boxes because oak is a very strong, durable wood and is also water resistant, which is really great for preventing warping down the road. Specifically, white oak is really what I'm talking about here. And I'm just using that same dark walnut water-based stain to take care of the top, bottom, and sides of the drawer face. Now, basically on every single drawer, the dovetails were coming apart. So I just put a little tiny dab of glue in each little dovetail, wiped up the residue, and clamped it up. And if you ever run into this problem where your clamps aren't long enough, what you can do is just take 2 or 3, if you can manage, clamps and just put them back to back. It's one of my favorite little tricks that I've learned over the years. And as you can see, it was pretty much on every single drawer that the dovetails needed fixing. But it's no problem, it's actually a very easy fix. Now that I got all my drawers clamped up, I'm just going to stain the rim of the door, which I'm using the same dark stain, the dark walnut stain. And after I have that done, I'm going to work on a couple of sections of veneer that were missing. I'm just going to end up filling them up with some wood filler. But first, I just need to make sure that all the veneer around it is still intact and glued down. And I know this isn't really the best shot because my hand is in the way with the glue bottle, but all I'm doing is I'm just using this razor blade just to peel up the veneer ever so slightly, and I'm fitting the nozzle of the glue bottle right underneath and injecting some glue. And a glue squeeze out is a great way to know that you have enough glue underneath there. And I'm just going to do the same thing with this next piece of veneer. I'm just sticking the razor blade underneath, lifting it up just a little bit, and injecting some glue. I'm going to wipe away the excess glue that's here. And there's really no good way to clamp this up, so I'm just going to take some tape and put as much pressure on that tape as I can just to get it as compressed as I can. I'm just using some wood filler here just to fill up this little spot of missing veneer. And I totally forgot to shake this up to mix everything together first, and it kind of exploded on me a little bit, but it's okay. I'll just wipe that up. And while I'm doing this, I'm just making sure that I leave it a little bit proud so that when I sand it off, it'll be flush. After drying for a couple hours, I just removed the tape, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to fill this up with some wood filler. I could do a veneer patch, but I don't really have any veneer that would match this too well. And either way, I would still have to do some color correction on it anyway, so I'm figuring that using some wood filler would probably just be the best in this case. After that wood filler dried, I'm just going to sand it all down smooth. And finally, I could start staining the rest of the piece. And I'm using the same water-based stain by Saman, but this time I'm actually using the color Walnut, which is a really beautiful color. It's not too dark, but it's not too light either. It's kind of right in the middle. It's actually kind of similar to the stain that was originally on the piece. And just like any other stain, I'm going to apply it, and in this case I am using a shop towel and a rag that I kind of go back and forth between, and I wipe the excess away. Now, unlike oil-based stains, this water-based stain dries very fast, so I'm working in sections. So I'll do one section, wipe up the excess, and I'll move on to the next section. And as I wipe this away, you could see the nice, beautiful color that this leaves behind. And I'm just going to do that for the entire piece. And right here, I'm not using any tape to prevent the stain from getting onto the trim. I actually want the stain to kind of mix a little bit with the trim, and I think it'll give it a pretty interesting effect. You won't notice it really too much, but it's just something I kind of wanted to experiment with. And as I wipe this away, you're going to be able to see those couple little small spots that I went through the veneer on. But it's alright, I'll just do my best to try to camouflage that a little bit later on. I decided to stain the little trim area around the inlay in the same color stain that I did the rest of the trim. And it's a little bit funny, actually. I easily could have just flipped this piece on its back to be able to get at the underside of the inlay. But me being me, I just decided to lay on my back and just sort of paint on the stain upside down. And I don't know why I thought this was a good idea in the moment, but it's what I did. And I decided to stain these little sections on both sides of the piece on the bottom in the same color that I did the trim work. And I think that this is going to add a little bit more dimension to the piece. And instead of having all of the front basically all one color, I'm just going to break it up a little bit with this other stain. And ironically, this is actually kind of what the original looked like in a way. Those two little bottom sections were also a little bit darker. And I'm just giving this inlay another quick sanding just to get off any stain that I might have gotten on. And now for the finish. I'm going to be using lacquer as my finish, but first I'm going to be applying Easy Vinyl Sealer by Mohawk. And all this is going to do is just seal the wood grain and isolate the lacquer from the raw wood itself. A good way to think about it is kind of like when you put a primer on before paint. It's kind of a similar dynamic. You don't really want to go at the wood with just raw lacquer. You really want to use this stuff first. And that's because it provides a very smooth surface that aids in the adhesion of the lacquer. It also enhances water resistance. And obviously, an important step before you would apply the Easy Vinyl Sealer is just to make sure that there's no dust on the piece. And tack rags are really great for that. And you may notice that the stain looks a little bit dull and even chalky almost. But as soon as I seal it up, it brings out the real nice, rich color of the stain. Now, after letting that Easy Vinyl Sealer dry for about an hour, I'm coming in with a 320 grit, and I'm going to give it a very, very light sanding. This is important because this gets rid of any dust nibs that may be on the piece, because unfortunately I don't really work in a dust-free environment, so dust does sometimes get on the piece. Now I'm just going to address those couple spots that I burned through the veneer a little bit, and I'm just using Mohawk Blend-All sticks in between coats of Easy Vinyl Sealer. All this is going to do is just isolate each color layer from each other and make the color work look a little bit more realistic. So what you're seeing here isn't the final result. This is just one layer that I'm doing out of a couple. I also used a stain touch-up marker just a little bit, just to try to get a little bit of a closer color match. Wasn't great at first, but it did help a little bit. It's really in the second layer that I'm going to be doing that is going to make it look a lot more realistic. So now, after 2 coats of Easy Vinyl Sealer, lightly sanding in between each coat, I am now applying the first of about 5 or 6 coats of a clear satin pre-catalyzed lacquer. And I should clarify, actually, I'm doing about 5 coats on the very top, and I'm doing only 4 coats on the rest of the piece. And you may notice here that it looks like I'm not getting full coverage with the spray. That's not the case, actually. It just appears that way for some reason, but I'm getting full coverage. I think it might be the lighting that kind of makes it look that way a little bit. All right, so we're almost done here, actually. Now I'm just going to install the hinges back onto the piece, and with the help of my dad, I actually got this door back on because this thing was pretty heavy. Now, to take care of this hardware, I am just using a degreaser just to clean up the little Bakelite components, and it actually worked very well. I just had to be extremely careful because these little Bakelite pieces were very thin, and I definitely did not want to break them. And I was planning on spray painting this hardware gold, but I then realized that I had some rub and buff, and I think rub and buff is going to give me more of the look I was kind of going for, more of like a antique-ish sort of a look. And I'm just testing some on the corner of this pole right here, and it actually looked really nice. So I'm going to continue and just use a brush and continue to put this rub and buff on. And a little goes a very, very long way with this stuff. You only need a little dab of it, and you can cover pretty much the entire pole. And just buffing it off here. And yeah, this is pretty much the look I was going for, kind of a weathered, tarnished kind of a look. Next, I'm just going to seal the drawer boxes with some shellac. And I know shellac isn't the most durable of finishes, but since this is just going to be holding some clothes, I feel like it's more than sufficient. I normally would use something like Howard Feed and Wax or Odie Super Duper Everlasting Oil, but this is just what I chose for this particular project. And I'm also putting some hemp oil on this beautiful cedar veneer. I'm choosing hemp oil because hemp oil is still going to allow the cedar to breathe and be able to emit that beautiful cedar smell without sealing it completely. And you'll notice too that the cedar is darkening up, but it will fade over time. And all I'm doing is applying the hemp oil, letting it sit for a little while, and I'm just rubbing off all of the excess. And that's it. We made it to the end of the video. So thank you guys so much for watching another video. And let's rewind a little bit and take a look at what this piece looked like before. It wasn't really in terrible shape, but there was a lot of damage in the form of a bunch of scratches and really bad pigtail marks. The stain itself was actually extremely blotchy as well, and it just kind of had an overall sort of dingy vibe to it. And I know Art Deco isn't really everybody's cup of tea, but I really hope you like what I did to this piece. So enjoy the reveal, and I will see you next time.